The climate crisis is the most urgent challenge facing humanity and the planet. It is not a distant threat, but a present reality that is already affecting millions of lives and ecosystems around the world. Here are some facts that explain the current state of the climate crisis and why urgent action is needed to avoid irreversible damage to the planet and its inhabitants. The climate crisis is caused by human activities that release greenhouse gases, mainly carbon dioxide, CO2, into the atmosphere. These gases trap heat and cause the Earth's average temperature to rise. Since pre-industrial times, starting in 1750, human emissions of heat-trapping gases have already warmed the climate by nearly 2 degrees Fahrenheit, 1.1 degrees Celsius. The effects of climate change are widespread and severe. They include melting glaciers and ice sheets, rising sea levels, more frequent and intense heat waves, droughts, wildfires, floods, storms, and hurricanes, shifting seasons and habitats, declining biodiversity and food security, and increased risks of diseases and conflicts. Some of these effects are irreversible for hundreds to thousands of years. For example, once ice sheets melt, they cannot be restored. The same goes for species that go extinct due to habitat loss or other factors. The longer we delay action, the more irreversible damage we will cause to the planet and its life support systems. The climate crisis is a social justice issue. It disproportionately affects the most vulnerable and marginalized people and communities, especially in developing countries. Those who have contributed the least to the problem are often the ones who suffer the most from its impacts. The climate crisis also exacerbates existing inequalities and injustices, such as poverty, hunger, discrimination, and human rights violations. The climate crisis can be solved, but only if we act now and together. There is still time to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit, which is the goal of the Paris Agreement, a global treaty signed by almost every country in 2015. To achieve this goal, we need to rapidly reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by switching to clean and renewable energy sources, improving energy efficiency, protecting and restoring natural ecosystems, promoting sustainable agriculture and consumption, and investing in green innovation and adaptation. The climate crisis is not a hopeless situation. It is an opportunity for us to create a better future for ourselves and generations to come. But we need to act now, before it's too late. The climate crisis is one of the most urgent and complex challenges of our time. It requires unprecedented levels of cooperation, ambition, and action from all levels of society. However, there are significant gaps and weaknesses in the existing climate action plans at the global, national, and local levels, which undermine our collective efforts to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius and adapt to its impacts. Some of the main gaps and weaknesses are lack of ambition. Many countries have not submitted updated or enhanced nationally determined contributions, NDCs, under the Paris Agreement, which are the pledges to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and increase resilience. According to the UN, the current NDCs would lead to a temperature rise of about 2.7 degrees Celsius by the end of the century, far above the 1.5 degrees Celsius goal. Moreover, many countries have not set long-term strategies to achieve net zero emissions by 2050 or sooner, which is essential to align policies and investments with the science. Lack of accountability. There is no effective mechanism to ensure that countries comply with their commitments and report transparently on their progress. The Paris Agreement relies on a system of peer pressure and public scrutiny, but there are no sanctions or penalties for non-compliance. Furthermore, there is a lack of clarity and consistency on how countries measure and report their emissions and adaptation actions, which makes it difficult to compare and assess their performance. Lack of funding. There is a huge gap between the financial resources needed to address the climate crisis and the actual flows of public and private finance. The UN estimates that developing countries need at least $100 billion per year by 2020 to mitigate and adapt to climate change, but only about $80 billion was mobilized in 2018. Moreover, most of the finance is directed towards mitigation rather than adaptation, which leaves many vulnerable communities and ecosystems exposed to the impacts of climate change. Lack of cooperation. There is a lack of coordination and collaboration among different actors and sectors involved in climate action, such as governments, civil society, private sector, academia, media, etc. This leads to duplication, fragmentation, inefficiency, and missed opportunities for synergies and innovation. For example, many cities have developed their own climate action plans without considering the regional context or engaging with other stakeholders. Additionally, there is a lack of trust and solidarity among countries with different levels of development, responsibility, and capacity to address the climate crisis. These gaps and weaknesses pose serious risks for our future and require urgent attention and action from all of us. In this video, we will explore some of the solutions and opportunities that can help us close these gaps and strengthen our climate action plans at all levels. Taking action to address climate change is not only necessary to avoid the worst impacts of global warming, but also beneficial for many aspects of our society and economy. In this section, we will emphasize some of the benefits of taking these actions, such as improving health, security, economy, biodiversity, etc. And the risks of not taking them, such as worsening disasters, conflicts, poverty, extinction, etc. One of the most obvious benefits of climate action is reducing the health risks associated with air pollution. By shifting to clean and renewable energy sources, we can prevent millions of premature deaths and illnesses caused by exposure to harmful emissions from fossil fuels. According to a study by the Union of Concerned Scientists, UCS, a standard requiring the nation to produce 25% of all electricity from renewable sources by 2025 would save more than 9,000 lives and prevent more than 200,000 asthma attacks per year. Moreover, climate action can also protect us from the spread of infectious diseases and heat-related illnesses that are expected to increase with rising temperatures and changing weather patterns. Another benefit of climate action is enhancing our security and stability. By reducing our dependence on fossil fuels, we can avoid the geopolitical conflicts and violence that are often associated with oil and gas resources. We can also reduce the risk of terrorism and sabotage that could target our energy infrastructure. Furthermore, climate action can help us prevent or mitigate the humanitarian crises that are likely to result from climate change, such as mass migration, food insecurity, water scarcity, and civil unrest. By taking proactive measures to reduce our emissions and adapt to the changing conditions, we can foster peace and cooperation among nations and communities. A third benefit of climate action is boosting our economy and creating jobs. By investing in clean energy and energy efficiency, we can stimulate innovation and competitiveness in our industries and markets. We can also save money on energy bills and healthcare costs. A UCS study found that a standard requiring the nation to produce 25% of all electricity from renewable sources by 2025 would create nearly 300,000 new jobs. That is 3 times the number of jobs that would be created by producing the same amount of electricity from coal and natural gas. Such a standard could also generate $263 billion in new capital investment, $14 billion in income for you, farmers, ranchers, and rural landowners, and $12 billion in new local tax revenues. A fourth benefit of climate action is preserving our biodiversity and ecosystems. By reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, we can slow down the rate of global warming and ocean acidification that are threatening the survival of many species and habitats. We can also protect our forests, wetlands, coral reefs, and other natural resources that provide us with essential services such as carbon sequestration, water purification, flood control, pollination, recreation, and cultural values. By conserving our biodiversity and ecosystems, we can ensure the well-being of all living beings on Earth. On the other hand, if we fail to take action to address climate change, we will face serious consequences that will outweigh any short-term benefits or costs. Some of these consequences include more frequent and intense extreme weather events such as heat waves, droughts, floods, storms, wildfires, etc. That will cause more deaths, injuries, damages, disruptions, and displacements. Rising sea levels that will inundate coastal areas and islands, erode shorelines, increase salinity intrusion into freshwater sources, and threaten millions of people and infrastructure. Changing precipitation patterns that will affect water availability and quality for agriculture, industry, energy production, and human consumption. Increasing temperatures that will reduce crop yields and food security, increase pest infestations and diseases transmission among plants and animals. Loss of biodiversity and ecosystems that will reduce the resilience and adaptability of nature to cope with climate change impacts. Social and economic impacts that will exacerbate poverty, inequality, conflict, violence, and human rights violations. These consequences will not only affect us but also future generations who will inherit a degraded planet with fewer opportunities and resources. Therefore, it is our moral duty and responsibility to take action now and ensure a safe and sustainable future for ourselves and our children. We have seen the devastating effects of climate change on our planet and our lives. We have witnessed the melting of glaciers, the rising of sea levels, the increase of extreme weather events, the loss of biodiversity, and the spread of diseases. We have also seen the social and economic impacts of climate change, such as displacement, migration, conflict, poverty, and inequality. These are not distant threats, but present realities that affect us all. But we are not helpless. We can still act to prevent the worst outcomes of climate change and to adapt to the changes that are already happening. We can still shape our future and the future of generations to come. We can still save our planet and ourselves. But we need to act now. We need to act together. We need to act with urgency and ambition. We need to act with collective and individual responsibility. Collective responsibility means that we need to work together as a global community to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to support the most vulnerable countries and people who are facing the impacts of climate change. It means that we need to cooperate and coordinate across nations, regions, sectors, and organizations to implement effective policies and solutions that are based on science and justice. It means that we need to hold our leaders accountable and demand that they take bold and decisive action to address the climate crisis. Individual responsibility means that we need to change our habits and behaviors to reduce our own carbon footprint and to live more sustainably. It means that we need to educate ourselves and others about the causes and consequences of climate change and the actions that we can take to make a difference. It means that we need to use our voice and our vote to support candidates and initiatives that are aligned with our values and vision for a greener and fairer world. We all have a role to play in this fight. We all have a stake in this outcome. We all have a choice to make. Will we choose to ignore the warnings and continue with business as usual? Will we choose to deny the reality and blame others for our problems? Will we choose to give up and accept defeat? Or will we choose to face the challenge and embrace the opportunity? Will we choose to innovate and create new solutions and possibilities? Will we choose to hope and act for a better future? The choice is ours. The time is now. The planet is waiting.